Am I on? Greetings, everybody. All these people showed out here for a Lenten study. I'm impressed. Yeah. Let's open a word of prayer. Will you bow your heads? Let's pray. Our Father and our God, we come to you this night as we move into the season of Lent, and we ask, Lord, tonight that for the next 3 weeks, at least on Wednesday nights, we're looking in your word and looking behind the word and how to apply it in our lives and what it means to walk in this season of Lent, to come closer to you. We ask you, Lord, to bless our time together, that as always the Holy Spirit would be in this sanctuary tonight and in our hearts, that we might leave here people that are more put back together and feel refreshed and renewed and healed. So it's your name we ask and pray these things. Amen. Just want to give a huge shout out. So normally when I do these presentations, I work on them before and we come out and practice all these. And tonight, nothing was working right. Normally we have a TV up here, sound wasn't working in here. And so my daughter, who's up there, she does the tech, Soraya, who just turned 17 yesterday, by the way. Yeah. She'll kill me that I just did that to her. And then Alex Perry came and assisted. It was great assistance. So if everything works tonight, I had a lot of videos and a lot of MP3s. And so if this works tonight, then we have parted the Red Sea. So you'll see tonight that this series is a 3-week series called The Way Home. And I've been asked by several of you, well, what is this about? Like, how does this apply to Lent? And even earlier today, I did a funeral out at Beaufort National Cemetery for, many of you know, John McKinley, who is the last World War II veteran I know, 100 years old, a great man, whose ship went down in the Pacific, many of you know. And he survived that, only to be fighting in the Battle of Guadalcanal and survived that. And we buried him today, and it was a glorious service, and out there at Beaufort National Cemetery. But Rod, are you here? Where's Rod? Rod asked me. He said, "What is this about?" And I said, if I can go back and change the title of this, it would be this: "The Longing for Home," because at least tonight that's what the entrance into this is. And so, really, for the next 3 weeks, is going to be looking up, looking at God, and looking in at ourselves, and then lastly, looking outward. So looking up and asking God to transform us, how does it change us on the inside? And then lastly, how do we go out? And how does this affect the church? How does it affect us as Christians? So I hope tonight is helpful. A lot of the themes I'm going to be talking about are common. In many ways, this presentation is an amalgamation of teachings I've done over the last 10, 12 years here. So if you've heard some of these things before, you're going to hear them again. But to me, sometimes repetition is best. But tonight's about faith, and what does faith mean, and how does it inform how we make our decisions in life? And I want you to hear this passage up here from Hebrews 11. Let's see if this works.
Faith shows the reality of what we hope for. It is the evidence of things we cannot see. Through their faith, the people in days of old earned a good reputation. By faith, we understand that the entire universe was formed at God's command, that what we now see did not come from anything that can be seen.
So this is really one of the definitions of faith. And why is faith so important? Why is it so essential? Let me explain it this way. Much of my calling as a pastor is walking with people through seasons where we feel like we cannot see, and things do not make sense. And we can't add things together. 2 + 2 doesn't seem to equal 4. And why is this puzzling for us as Christians? Well, let me put a couple of passages up here. When you read these passages up here, not a hair on your head will be harmed. The Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you, and he will never forsake you. Or the one many of us have, a lot of people have this next verse on their refrigerators, right? For we know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and to harm you, plans to give you a hope and plans to give you a future. I remember one time, very specifically, sometimes I often say, getting into people's lives, being in ministry changes how you preach, changes how you talk to people. And I remember one time I was preaching on that passage right there out of Jeremiah 29. And I remember looking at the front row out at the 10 o'clock service on the historic campus. And I was looking at a woman, and just 3 weeks earlier, I had buried her 9-year-old son who drowned. And I remember thinking, what is she thinking when she sees that verse? What's going on in her head? And it does change how we understand this. And how do we understand this? There's a future that directly impacts our present circumstances. So, for example, the example I've used before, if you have 2 garbage workers, and both of them are working the same lousy hours, the same lousy job, not appreciated, very underpaid, but one of them is promised a $5,000 bonus at the end of the year, and one of them is promised a $5 million bonus at the end of the year. Do you think the $5 million bonus is going to change the present circumstances of the garbage worker at that time? Absolutely, compared to the other man, because he knows what the future holds for him. It's the same for us as believers. And yet I know for us that many of us, the idea of contentment, the idea of the goal of achieving what we want to and having success, we all yearn for this. And yet it's been my experience, this seems to elude every single human being, does it not? Even the greatest athletes feel like they never achieve what they want to. The most successful, wealthiest people in the world seem like they can't get enough. And as Americans, we're masters at getting more. Our culture is built on this principle. And yet, I don't think I'm saying too much of a stretch to say more than ever, we still feel a deep, deep discontentment. And often, when I've thought about this and I've listened to people, very often I've listened to other people, how they present this. I remember over the years, and certainly the older in here can testify to this, you've probably heard many sermons about discontentment. And I've listened to enough, and they go something like this. We live in America. We don't have soldiers, enemy soldiers on our doorstep. We don't have to worry about our wives and our daughters being raped tonight. We have food on our tables. We live in one of the most prosperous nations in the history of the world. I've heard it said before, if you can condense all of history into 1,000 people, we are living better than 0.0001% of all people have ever lived. So if you condense history into 1,000 people, we are the one out of compared to the other 999 as far as wealth and comfort and security. And yet, all of us still feel like there's more, that we're missing this. And so you'll hear pastors say, we're the wealthiest nation in the history of the world. You feel discontentment. You shouldn't feel discontentment because discontentment is bad, and therefore you are bad. And the way you're going to heal this is the way I've been told over the years. The way you're going to heal this is primarily through guilt. Okay, I'm just going to make you feel bad enough. So go in peace and love and serve the Lord, you maggots, right? Now, guilt, I've discovered, it does help for a little bit. I mean, it does get you changed for a little bit, but it doesn't change the heart. It doesn't change down inside. And I want to talk about that tonight, about this whole idea of discontentment, because this is not just an American problem. I've traveled enough around the world. I've been on mission trips. This is a mankind problem. And let me just give you a couple of secular quotes, if I can. One of them is this, and I love this quote up here. Mark Twain: "You don't know what it is you really want, but it certainly makes your heart ache because you want it so." He had a way of saying things, did he not? Or this other one by Wallace Stevens said this: even in contentment, I feel the need for some imperishable bliss. In other words, even when we have everything we want, we still feel like there's something more. Even with earthly happiness, Stevens knows that it goes away. And the paradox, I think, arises the self-defeating nature of human desire, and that is, the more we actually get something, the more we want of it, or even something greater than that. And many people are duped into thinking this has to do with money. I don't know anybody I've ever met who actually thinks money buys happiness. But I do know a lot of us think, well, it definitely can buy contentment. And I don't think that's necessarily true either. And I'll put another quote up here. Jim Carrey said this: I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they've ever dreamed of so they can find out that's not the answer too. And he would know. I mean, he's made millions. He's been a very successful actor. Now, what Paul says is, Paul talks about a secret. The Apostle Paul does. And I think he taps into something here that has both captured my heart and has spoken to the deepest part of my being. And something it's been a discussion even in my accountability group for years, this whole idea of what does it mean to be contented, to walk close with God and be content with what you have. And I want you to listen to what Paul says.
I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want.
Now, I want to highlight this there because he gives a contrast here of two different kind of ideas. That is, he said, I know what it's like to have not to have anything. I know what it's like to be in need. He says, I know what it's like to be well-fed, and I know what it's like to be hungry. I know what it's like to have plenty, and I know what it's like to be in want. So basically, he is comparing, I want to put up here, the idea of contentment. He's basically saying here, do we find our contentment in earthly things, or do we find our contentment in heavenly things, eternal things? And I think this gets right down to it. Much of our discontentment is probably found in earthly things versus eternal things. And the way you can tell whether you feel contentment is how you respond to these things. And I don't think there's a person here that this hasn't affected. But let me give you an illustration of this. I heard this years ago because he admitted it. So, do you know who this is? Tom Brady, okay? If you're counting right, that's 7 Super Bowl rings. 7. All right. Now, years ago, when I think he was probably just, at that time, just 30 years of age, he'd already won 3. And he gave an interview on 60 Minutes, and I found what he said was absolutely fascinating, because in my opinion, he's the greatest quarterback in history. And he talked about, even though he won the 3 Super Bowls, how empty he felt. And he thought there was more. Listen to what he says.
Why do I have 3 Super Bowl rings and still think there's something greater out there for me? I mean, maybe a lot of people would say, hey, man, this is what it is. I reached my goal, my dream, my life is me. I think, God, it's got to be more than this.
Now, he actually said God there. There has to be more than this. And think about it. He's won 4 more, and he's still not happy. He still doesn't feel contentment. And it seems like this would be someone you would think who's achieved it all here. And let me speak personally to this about this idea. And I'll give an illustration about this, about how even when you feel fulfilled, you still feel there's something more that I'm trying to get to that we can never really attain to. Let me give you an example of this. So when I lived up in the mountains in North Carolina, in Boone, North Carolina, one of my favorite places on the earth, when we lived up there, Lisa and I did with our family, that time we had just 5 children. Josiah was just 1 year old when we moved there. But we lived up on the top of a valley, and we could look down the valley. Now, I have a video I shot one time off my back deck. I could look off the back. We lived up in a cabin, log cabin, and we would look down this valley. And every day I would go out on my deck, every single day, and would look out, and I would just take it, and I would feel so full, so alive like this. And yet I couldn't get enough of it. I couldn't get more of it. And even take this a step further, in the wintertime, when it would snow, and up there where we were, it would drop down to 0, 10 degrees, 15 degrees. And I would get up in the morning, and I would crack open the window, and I would stick my face out into the cold and let the wind blow on me. And then what I found, I wanted to go out and actually get into the snow and lay down, right? And it's almost like when you see a great piece of art, and you want to get inside the art. You've ever experienced this? You want to get behind the art? Or you hear a great piece of music and you just play it over and over and over again. You're trying to hear every single thing about it. You're trying to get behind it. This is what I'm talking about here. And the reason why I get joy out of it, because it quenches a thirst, but it doesn't do it permanently. And this is the paradox is, and the things that bring us the most enjoyment often will leave us, I believe, the most deeply unfulfilled, or a greater longing. And this is why you can hear great music. This is why you can stand before a landscape and you can watch it, and yet you still want more. You still want what's behind it. These incredibly beautiful moments, whether it's in music, whether it's in nature, whether it's in art, these things. And as Lewis quoted, we realize we're just spectators. He said, beauty has smiled on us, but it hasn't welcomed us in. Now, I guess I'm asking the question tonight, because this is getting behind really this ultimate series, is why does music send us to the skies? Why does art move us? Why do these things move us emotionally? Why does it, when we stand before, why does everyone want to move to the ocean and move to the mountains? Why is that? Because there's some kind of longing we have that I think is deeper. There's a desire underneath the desire. And what is that? Well, let me see if I can explain it this way. Under our desire for music, for food, for art, for sex, for anything, everything is a deeper desire. A desire, what I would say, a desire for eternity. And let me give you a word I heard years ago, a German word. I'll put it up here. Anybody know German out here? Okay. Sehnsucht. Sehnsucht. That's why I can say it with confidence, because there's no Germans here to correct me, right? Sehnsucht. And what does Sehnsucht mean? This is the actual definition of Sehnsucht. And it's this eternal longing we have. This is the definition. The inconsolable longing in the human heart, for we know not what, is an intense, recurring, and often painful desire for something that was lost and yet still far away. Or another definition is this one. The inconsolable yearning for something we can't define clearly. A strong craving for a place that is familiar, but it's far and non-earthly, which one thinks of as their home. This is the reason why I think this is true of almost all of us. We can move to the best place in the world, and yet we feel like there's somewhere else we're trying to get to. Have you felt like that? There is a hill we're supposed to get over. There's something's around the corner that's awaiting us. And what I want to say to you, and I want to kind of highlight this, which one thinks of as their home, I would suggest to you this. This is the whole idea of the longing to get back to Eden. The longing to get to the place where we shouldn't live. As I reminded people, and I even said this today, we were meant to live forever. We were designed to live forever. We were meant to walk with God in the cool of the evening. We were meant to be with him and have perfect relationship. We were meant to never have disease and death and hunger and all these things. We were meant to be close to God. But through the fall, through the curse, we lost that. And ever since then, we've been trying to get back there. So what I'm saying to you is the art, the music, nature, all these things are whispers of something eternal and a place we long to get to. And we see shadows of it. We hear whispers of it. It also vanishes. But what I want you to know, I think the desire is actually biblical. I think the desire has been put there by God. And it may seem bizarre, but this is where I think discontentment can actually help. Discontentment can actually point us to God. Instead of just being bitter or angry, it can actually point us to God. It points us to why we feel like this. And Paul alludes to this in 1 Corinthians, and I've preached on this often, that he gives this idea that our view of the world, the view of ourselves is clouded, is dim. Look what he says here. For now we see but only poor reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. Now, I've highlighted this part here. Now I know in part. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even if I'm fully known. So what Paul is saying here is we can only see in part. How much is that? I do not know. But I know it's not fully. And what I find amazing about this is if you look at the old translations, they talk about a reflection in a mirror. And the mirrors in Paul's day were very different than the mirrors we have today. And I had to go back and look online. I found a mirror that's actually selling online for $18,000. And it was made during, I think, the American Revolution. And this is what it looks like. That's it. Okay? Now imagine looking yourself in that mirror. Okay? Maybe some of you want to look in that mirror, right? Like, because it doesn't show everything. It's just a partial rendering of who you are. It's a partial reflection of this. So it's not a surprise then, even to me, even when the King James translation of this is that we see through a glass darkly. We can see shadows, but we can't see fully. We can't see clearly. And what I find even more amazing about this, bring this back up here, when it says here we see but a poor reflection, this is, I find amazing. The Greek word that is used there for poor reflection is the Greek word enigma, enigmatai. So it's where we get our word enigma. And an enigma is something or someone that is hard to understand or hard to explain, a mysterious person or a mysterious situation. And the more I thought about that, the more I thought, gosh, are we not all enigmas? Do we not all feel this idea? Okay. For now I see only as an enigma, as in a mirror. We just see just a part of what we are, just a portion of what we are. And also, I might even add here, that word enigma, enigmatai, it is the only place that we find this word in the entire New Testament. In fact, the entire Bible. It's what, I think I've said this before, it's what theologians call a hapax legomena, okay? I just want you to throw that out here tonight. But it means spoken only once. But I think Paul used this word deliberately to speak into our hearts. And no matter how much we succeed, no matter what we have, there's always this sense that we can't see fully, we can't understand fully. And so when I put this up here, now but I see but a poor reflection in the mirror, one day I shall see face to face. There is a day coming. There is a time coming that we will see everything. And Paul talks about that. He speaks into this. But here's the thing I want you to see. Here's the hope. There is a desire to want to see it. We have a longing, it's from God. And if I can even take this a step further, I heard this quote years ago, and I think this explains, even in sinful situations, why people go after the stuff they go after. And G.K. Chesterton gave me a quote years ago that has stuck with me. It's been debated about who said it, but Chesterton was one that's attributed to, but he said this: every man that goes knocking on the door of a brothel is really searching for God. They're looking for something to actually address what's wrong with them. But they're looking for it in all the wrong places here. And for years, I just didn't know what this was, and I struggled with this, and I talked about this, and this is what gave my whole love affair to C.S. Lewis. He's the one that spoke into this feeling I had for years and years and years. I just couldn't put words to it, what I felt, and I thought there was just something wrong with me. And he wrote an incredible book called The Problem of Pain, and he talks about this. He put to words innately what I knew was there, but he took the scriptures and he expounded on them and spoke, I think, what I always say, he introduced the gospel to me through the back door. And that we have Christ, we have peace, and yet we're on a journey. God's taken us somewhere. And let me see if I want to show you several quotes that he said from these books, but that speak into this idea of this longing, this inconsolable longing, he called it. Listen to this.
You have stood before some landscape which seems to embody what you have been looking for all your life, even in your hobbies. Has there not always been some secret attraction but always on the verge of breaking through, the smell of cut wood in the workshop, or the clap-clap of water against the boat's side? That's something which you were born desiring, and which, beneath the flux of other desires and in all the momentary silences between the louder passions, night and day, year by year, from childhood to old age, you are looking for, watching for, listening for. You have never had it.
So, what he's saying is, when you stand before a landscape and you feel something, but you want more of it, that's what he's talking about here. So we look for it in music, we look for it in art, we look for it in all these different areas here. And he speaks into this idea of what does this mean? And what is this pointing to? And so he goes on to say this.
All the things that have ever deeply possessed your soul have been but hints of it, tantalizing glimpses, promises never quite fulfilled, echoes that died away just as they caught your ear. But if it should really become manifest, if there ever came an echo that did not die away but swelled into the sound itself, you would know it. Beyond all possibility of doubt, you would say, here at last is the thing I was made for.
So this is the idea of what we call nostalgia, where we have this idea, every now and then you'll catch something in your ear and you'll remind you, and it's like you're trying to grasp it, but you can't really capture it. Has anybody ever experienced this? You can't fully grab it. It's like sand in your fingers. This is what he's talking about here, and this is why he said, even me right now, I'm struggling for words to kind of describe this, because I don't know if you can describe it. It may be undefinable, but he tries to here. Listen what he says.
We cannot tell each other about it. It is the secret signature of each soul, the incommunicable and unappeasable want, the thing we desired before we met our wives, or made our friends, or chose our work, and which we shall still desire on our deathbeds, when the mind no longer knows wife or friend or work.
And he's right on this. This is why I love this man so much, because he has the guts and the honesty to admit what we all feel all the time. And yet I would even say, as people of faith, we're maybe sometimes worried about saying this because it's going to come across as doubt or lack of faith. I don't think so. Lewis really wonders if all these things are a direct result of our inconsolable longing here, this yearning, the books we read, the hobbies we take up, the friends we make, are all traceable to this secret signature of our souls. He says this.
The books or the music in which we thought the beauty was located will betray us if we trust to them. It was not in them. It only came through them. And what came through them was longing. These things, the beauty, the memory of our own past, are good images of what we really desire. But if they are mistaken for the thing itself, they turn into dumb idols, breaking the hearts of their worshippers. For they are not the thing itself. They are only the scent of a flower we have not found, the echo of a tune we have not heard, news from a country we have never visited.
Now, what I find amazing about this is why this is so important for us as believers. If you ever wonder why people worship nature, it's because of this. They're looking at the creation rather than the creator. They're worshiping the creation. And it talks about this in Romans 1. People begin to worship creation rather than the author behind it. And so this is why you see people worship bands, musicians, artists, nature itself. It's because they are putting too much weight in these things themselves instead of what the author is that's behind this. And what Lewis says, and I think he's right on this, all this is our desire to get back to the garden, to get to heaven. And this is the reason why, by the way, so many of the great authors of our time, even the last several centuries, write stories about this, fantasies about this. What do you think Rivendell's about? Or the Chronicles of Narnia, or let's just even say Neverland. I mean, J.M. Barrie wrote Peter Pan. What's that about? It's about never losing your friendships that last forever. It's about never growing old. Hello. It's about never growing old. Those things that are eternal, things that they were supposed to be. We were never supposed to lose our friends. We weren't supposed to die. So they speak into these things, this longing we have that's always there, that's never left us. And therefore, Lewis wonders if this is something we've desired since we practically can crawl. Listen to what he says.
There have been times when I think we do not desire heaven, but more often I find myself wondering whether, in our heart of hearts, we have ever desired anything else. You may have noticed that the books you really love are bound together by a secret thread. You know very well what is the common quality that makes you love them, though you cannot put it into words.
And that's why, even tonight, I'm struggling for words of this, to describe this feeling that we have, this idea of discontentment, what it means. So listen to what he also says.
We do not want merely to see beauty, though God knows even that is bounty enough. We want something else which can hardly be put into words, to be united with the beauty we see, to pass into it, to receive it into ourselves, to bathe in it, to become part of it.
Now, that idea of wanting to bathe in it, it's like I said when I was in Boone, I wanted to get out and get in the snow, to lay in it, to try to get more into it. Again, this is pointing us to God. It's pointing us back to Him. It's really pointing to home, our longing for home. Now, he wrote a book, again, Lewis wrote a book called Till We Have Faces. This may be one of my favorite books he's written. And there's really one quote in there that has always captured my heart. And let me put it up here. And I have to read this one, okay? So just bear with me. It was when I was the happiest that I longed the most. The sweetest thing in all my life has been the longing. And what am I longing for? To reach the mountain, to find the place where all the beauty came from. My country, the place where I ought to have been born. You ever felt like that? Like there's some place I should have been born there, okay? Do you think it all meant nothing? All the longing for home? For indeed, it does not feel like it's going. If anything, it feels like going back. So what I'm saying to you is God has taken us someplace, somewhere better, somewhere great, somewhere special. He's taken us somewhere. And I want to kind of highlight there, the place where I ought to have been born, that we all feel like this idea that there's something more there. So after Lewis became a Christian, he began to look back on all his experiences in his life, and he began to view them very differently. And I have to say, I view the experiences in my life very differently now, looking back. That all those longings I have really pointed me to Christ. My faith is stronger because of these things. And the desire for the inconsolable has actually made me, I think, become more a committed believer. And so the times where I have a frustration, I remember thinking, okay, it shouldn't be like this. There is a better day coming. There is somewhere we're going here. And I think this is evidence that we're made for God. Now, the great mistake I think most of us make is that very often we will make the means as an end in itself instead of actually showing us where we're trying to get to. again, what I was saying earlier, how you watch people worship art or music or nature or get frustrated we don't have more success. If we don't realize the cause of it, we are going to be deeply, deeply frustrated. But what I want you to know, I actually think it can actually help us. It can actually point us to somewhere greater. That it's not just fleeting, that it actually strengthens our relationship with God. In other words, it's about where we're trying to get to and where God is leading us. And this is the reason why, by the way, during the season of Lent, we have these seasons in our church calendar because we have to constantly remind ourselves to come back to God, because it's very easy during the year to fall away. It's very easy to slide a little bit. It's very easy to get discontented. It's very easy to ask, what's wrong with me? But these things, these rhythms point us back to God. Again, it's about looking up and then looking in. Because look again what it says here. Do you think it all meant nothing? Of course it didn't. The longing for home, for indeed it feels not like going, but actually like going back. So this constant feeling of longing. And I think it points to something greater here. And I think what Lewis was trying to get at here was, and I almost for sure of this, I'm telling you I'm right on this. I haven't talked to the man, but one day I will in the city of God. But I have a feeling when he was writing about all this, he was writing about Hebrews 11. There, he was writing about what I call looking to eternal foundations. What do I mean by that? Well, in Hebrews 11, the writer of Hebrews gives all these very famous people in the faith, Abraham and Enoch and Noah and Sarah and all these great famous people of the faith. And yet if you look at their lives, all of them are deeply flawed, like we are. And yet God says they're great. But the one that is most written about there in that 11th chapter of Hebrews is Abraham. And look what it says here.
It was by faith that Abraham obeyed when God called him to leave home and go to another land that God would give him as his inheritance. He went without knowing where he was going. And even when he reached the land God promised him, he lived there by faith, for he was like a foreigner living in tents. Abraham was confidently looking forward to a city with eternal foundations, a city designed and built by God.
A city designed and built by God. How beautiful is that? I want to highlight these things. It was by faith that Abraham, he was confidently looking forward to a city with eternal foundations, a city designed and built by God. He knew his worth, his glory, his city, what he was built for, what he was made for, was propelling him to somewhere greater. He was longing, and I think he heard whispers of this, to get home. And I think we're all like Abraham and like this. We all feel the echoes, we hear the whispers, we see the shadows, we have peace, and yet we know it's not completely there. In other words, it hadn't been completely consummated yet. It's what theologians call the already and the not yet. We already have peace, and yet not yet completely. We are already in the household of God, and yet we're not home yet. We're the citizens of God living in another city right now. And the scriptures teach us this. We're made, and yet we're being made. We have peace, and yet it's not completely finished yet. And let me see if I can illustrate this another way about looking to eternal foundations. So I think I mentioned this maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. Many of you know my infatuation with all things Tolkien. This past summer, Lisa and I, or actually it was in October, we went to Oxford. Greatest trip of our life. It was just awesome. 1,000 years condensed into a city. 38 colleges, all within a 2-mile radius. Lewis is buried there. Tolkien's buried there. All the great martyrs of Anglican faith died there, defending their faith. Cranmer, Ridley. It's just an incredible city. And so, we went to see all the things with Tolkien. And one of the things that I've talked about before that was immensely therapeutic to me years ago for lots of reasons is he wrote a book, I want to put up here, kind of a book people don't know about, called Tree and Leaf. And there's a particular story in this book called Leaf by Niggle. I want to put it up here. And I love why he wrote, it's a very short story. And he wrote it because when he was writing Lord of the Rings, he began to have writer's block. One of the greatest authors in history could not write anything. And so to take a break, he went out and wrote this short story called Leaf by Niggle. And one of the things is that often his faith spilled over into his pen. And this is very evident in this case, because to me, his Christian faith is buried deep in the narrative here. But if you don't know anything about Leaf by Niggle, I'll put his little picture up here. He was an artist in this town of his, and a very well-known artist. And more near the end of his life, the town basically hired him to paint this giant mural tree on one of the walls of just inside the city. And they paid him a large sum of money to do this. And so he begins to paint this tree, and he's working it, and all he can get out is just a leaf. And he spends days and weeks and months working on this. And people are like, when are you going to be finished? When are you going to be finishing this? He's like, I'm working on it. And all he can get out is just one leaf. Now, he knew what he wanted to paint, but he couldn't get it out. I don't know if you've ever experienced this before. You know what you want to do, and you can't do it. You can't get there. So he had this idea, but he didn't know how to get it out. And then of all things, and the town's constantly frustrated at him, saying, why aren't you getting this done? We paid you. Why? And he's feeling this. And then suddenly he dies. He dies. I know, it sounds so depressing. He's on a train. He may be a bicycle. I got to go back and listen to it again, okay? And he's heading toward heaven. And it's a train now, okay? He's looking out these windows, and all these things are going by, and the train begins to slow down, and he looks out, and he looks over across this field, and he sees his tree there on the outskirts of heaven. And he sees everything, and it's blowing, it's alive, it's blowing in the wind, this tree, all the leaves. And this is what he says. Before him stood the actual tree, his tree, finished. If you could say that of a tree that was alive. Its leaves were opening, its branches growing and bending in the wind that Niggle had felt for so long and imagined so often, but failed to catch it. He gazed at the tree and slowly lifted up his arms to heaven and said, "It is a gift." He went on looking at the tree. All the leaves that he had ever labored for were there, even the ones that he had imagined but could never make happen. So here's a man who envisioned this great work, but all he could do was get out a leaf, and he always felt frustrated by this, that he couldn't do more. And here's the thing, okay, but I think this is what this points to heaven about this. The tree existed. The tree actually existed here. And I want you to think about this, about your own lives. I've said, even when our dreams are lost, I do believe that God will one day restore what the locusts have eaten. I don't know how. I just know that he will. And I've even said this to parents too, because we know in the book of Revelation, we see children there. Children, how is that possible? I don't know, but Randy Alcorn writes about this in his book Heaven, which I think is the great book written on it, that he believes somehow the memories you've lost of children who've died young are somehow going to be restored. I don't know how, but I think it's possible here. And I think this is true with what Tolkien was trying to get to about this leaf by Niggle here. Because he was trying to, I think, communicate something very biblical here. That is, life will leave us discouraged. Have we discovered this? a ton of discontentment, dreams never quite achieved. Even if they are, they feel like they're lacking. And because of the fall, whether it's our vocation, whether it's our own weaknesses, whether it's raising children, Lisa will tell you we probably have a lot more bad nights than good nights because of that. We're always tired. We always feel broke, usually both. And maybe we're ever going, as parents, maybe we're ever going to get out as just a leaf. But the tree existed, and I want you to know it's okay. And the story reflects the gospel, because let me just give you this simple standpoint here, and this is what I mean by this. Let me just make this real time here for different people from different vocations. People who go into law, like my son is a second-year law student at Tennessee. If you go into law, he wants to see justice. Living in an unjust world. If you go into medicine, you want to practice it in a way where you see people healed. If you go into architecture or engineering, you want to build great structures that make our world better. If you're an artist or a musician, you want to create things that bring joy to people, that move people here. But here, everyone here knows as soon as you try to actually go out and do these things, to be a good lawyer, to be a good teacher, to be a good artist, to be a good architect, an engineer, as soon as you actually go out and try to do these things, you soon discover how hard it is and how frustrating it is and how you can never really achieve what you want. And it's very easy to lose hope because of thorns and because of thistles. It talks about this in Genesis here. You can work for years and years and years and only ever get a leaf out. Okay. I know what this is like. I feel like this all the time here. But Christianity gives us a radical hope here, that it gives these passions and these visions to see the human race be all that it can be, but even so much more that God made it to be. And because we live in a broken world, we're going to feel frustrated here. But again, there is a tree. Therefore, I say this, if you're a lawyer, there is a day that is coming when there will be perfect righteousness. If you're a doctor, there is a day when people are going to be ultimately healed. If you're an engineer or an architect, there is a day coming where we're going to see perfect structures in the city of God that last forever. If you're a teacher, there is a day coming where we're going to know fully, not partially. And so if you realize we're not there yet, but we're actually going to be there one day, I think that brings great encouragement to us. That there are times that are coming that are going to be so much greater. And whether we have plenty, whether we have nothing at all, we should be the ones, Christians of all people, know God has taken us somewhat place. All the days that are behind us, and the days are getting shorter. We're getting closer here. So let me put the passage up here again. All that I know now is partial and incomplete. But then I will know everything completely, just as God now knows me completely. Okay? But then. What a great statement. What does he say? I have learned the secret of living in every situation, whether it's with a full stomach or empty, whether it's plenty or little, for I can do everything through Christ who gives me the strength. Listen to this one last part. This is Lewis reading from The Weight of Glory.
At present, we're on the outside of that world, the wrong side of the door. We cannot mingle with the splendors we see. But all the leaves of the New Testament are rustling with the rumor that it will not always be so. One day, God willing, we shall get in. Meanwhile, the cross comes before the crown, and tomorrow is another morning. A cleft is opened in the pitiless walls of this world, and we have been invited to follow our great captain inside. Following him is, of course, the essential point.
Lord, we thank you for all the gifts you bestow on us as people of God. And Lord, first of all, we just ask for forgiveness for times we've failed to recognize that. And we ask, Lord, tonight that as we discover what it means to have this inconsolable longing or the idea of discontentment, all these things point us back to you, point us to you. So as we move into these next couple of weeks, we ask, Lord, that you would take these words, not only in your word, but from countless saints down through the centuries have shared what this means, and might apply these to our lives, looking inward and looking upward. It's in your name we pray these things. Amen. All right, so before us, any questions, comments you have tonight? The floor is open if you want. It is a lot. Yeah, it is a lot. It is very heavy. Thank you. All right. Yes, question. Oh, no. He wrote probably 60 books. So, yeah, that was The Weight of Glory, Till We Have Faces. Yeah, exactly. There's several other ones there. I can point them to you. The ones yeah. But they were. Remember, he wrote these 80, 90 years ago. So it's very British. So some people get in and go, "Oh my gosh, this guy lost me in the first 2 or 3 pages. Come talk to me. I don't mind opening it up." So I love the man. Any other questions, comments? Yes. Oh, yeah, looking for eternal foundations. Yeah. I've seen this as a pastor. I recall those watching online, someone was commenting about someone who was dying, seeing things before they died and experiencing these things. One of my friends who's a pastor in this community, a local pastor, I'm close to a lot of ministers in the community, and about 7 or 8 years ago, we went out to lunch. He was telling me about just a few days earlier, there was a woman in our community who died of ovarian cancer. She was 40 years of age. She had a couple of young children. And he said, one of the most amazing stories I've ever heard, but he said he went to see her, and, she was dying. And many of you know, when you're suffering that kind of cancer, very often the last week, you're asleep the entire time. And she hadn't eaten in probably 10 or 11 days, hadn't had water in several days, and she hadn't moved. She was in bed. She hadn't spoken to anybody in days, didn't acknowledge anybody. She was asleep. And so Eric said he went to her room, and he began to pray at the foot of her bed, just pray over her that God would receive her. And suddenly she sat up in bed and held out her arms like this. And she said, and she began to look behind Eric, and he thought that her husband had come in. So he looked back, and there's nobody there. And she said, "Look, they're all here." She lay back down, took one breath, and she was gone. Looking to eternal foundations. Any other comments, questions? Yes. Yeah, so next week, the question is, what do I see the next 2 parts? Next week, we're going to be looking at what I would say, what is it? I always say the sin beneath the sin. What causes us to fall away? What causes us to make mistakes? What causes us to question? And what's underneath those things? I'm always about what's underneath it, because again, I'm not about guilt. I'm about life change and transformation. So next week, we're going to be looking at that. And then the week after that, we're going to be looking at what does it mean for us as a church, how we go out into the community, how does this affect us, and warnings really for us as a people of God. We can take out of the book of Revelation that I think will be very, very helpful for us as a church. All right. Anybody else? All right.
It just reminds me that this is not our home.
Yeah, not yet. Yeah, not the home as we know it. Yeah. All right. Well, go in peace of love and serve the Lord.